Hey, welcome to The Explainer. When we talk about crime, we usually focus on who did it. But today, we're flipping that around and asking why. What if the real answer isn't in someone's background, but inside their head? We're going to dive deep into the cognitive explanations for criminal behavior, looking at this wild idea that certain ways of thinking can actually lead someone to break the law. So let's get right to the heart of it with our big question today. Is criminal behavior really all in the mind? Is it a product of, faulty thinking? The cognitive approach pretty much says yes. It argues that our thought patterns, our moral compass, that's what's crucial here. The whole idea is that criminals don't just act differently, they actually think differently. And it's these internal processes, what's going on upstairs, that really shapes what they do. So where did this whole idea even start? Well, our first stop is a guy named Lawrence Kohlberg, a psychologist who came up with this really cool idea. He said that our sense of right and wrong isn't something we're just born with. It develops in stages, kind of like climbing a ladder. And his big theory? He suggested that a lot of offenders are basically stuck on the lower rungs of this moral ladder. They just haven't climbed as high as most other people. Okay, so Kohlberg breaks this moral ladder down into three main levels. Let's start at the bottom with pre-conventional morality. This is super basic, childlike reasoning. It's all about avoiding punishment and getting rewards. Simple as that. Then you move up to the middle level, conventional morality. This is where most of us hang out. We follow the rules because we want to maintain social order, be seen as a good person. And then at the very top, you have post-conventional morality. This is where people operate based on their own abstract ethical principles. Sometimes they'll even break a law if they believe it conflicts with a higher moral good. Now, here's the kicker. The theory suggests that many criminals are stuck right back on that first level, the pre-conventional one. So you might be wondering, how on earth did he test this stuff? Well, he used these clever little stories called moral dilemmas. The most famous one is the Heinz dilemma. Picture this. A man's wife is dying. There's one drug that can save her, but he absolutely cannot afford it. So, should he steal it? Now, Colbert didn't care if you said yes or no. What he was listening for was the why, your reasoning. Someone at that pre-conventional level might say, no way, he'll get thrown in jail. But someone way up at the post-conventional level might argue, of course he should steal it. A human life is worth way more than a company's property. You see, it's the reasoning that shows which rung of the ladder you're on. All right, let's build on that with our second big idea. Because it's not just about having underdeveloped morals. It's also about having messed up, faulty thinking patterns. Psychologists have a term for this, cognitive distortions, and they're exactly what they sound like. They're these irrational ways of thinking that make people see the world incorrectly, and, crucially, help them justify their own bad actions. And this slide shows two of the most common distortions you see in offenders. First up, hostile attribution bias. Okay, imagine someone accidentally bumps into you. For most of us, it's a no big deal moment. But for someone with this bias, they might immediately think it was a deliberate attack and lash out. They see hostility where there isn't any. Then on the other side, you've got minimalization. This is a classic. It's when offenders try to downplay just how bad their crime was. A burglar might say, hey, I'm just providing for my family. Or an attacker might say the victim had it coming. It's all about twisting the story to make themselves feel less guilty. So, okay, we've got these two big ideas, underdeveloped morals and a faulty thinking. They sound plausible, right? But the big question is there any actual evidence to back this stuff up? Let's dig in and see if these theories can actually hold their own. And you know what? There's some pretty compelling evidence out there. A really important study by Palmer and Holland did exactly this. They compared a group of offenders to a group of non-offenders using those same kinds of moral dilemmas. And guess what they found? The results were spot on with what Kohlberg's theory predicted. The offender group showed way less mature, more of that pre-conventional moral thinking compared to the non-offenders. That's a pretty strong link, right? Lower moral reasoning seems to go hand in hand with criminal behavior. But maybe the biggest point in favor of all this is how it's used in the real world. Think about it. If faulty thinking causes crime, then fixing that thinking should reduce crime, right? Well, that's the whole basis for cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's a type of therapy that gets right in there and challenges these distorted thought patterns head on. And you know what? It works. By teaching offenders to spot their faulty thinking and develop a higher level of moral reasoning, research shows that these programs are actually effective at stopping people from reoffending. That's a huge deal. Okay, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. As you know, in psychology, it's never that simple. These cognitive explanations are super useful, for sure, but they have their fair share of critics. So let's be fair and take a look at some of the limitations and the really tough questions people have raised. So here are three big counter-arguments. First off, the type of crime really seems to matter.
This theory is actually pretty good at explaining crimes that are planned out, like stealing for money. But for impulsive, violent crimes, not so much. In fact, some research found that moral reasoning was a terrible predictor for things like assault. Second, there's this huge gap between what people think and what they actually do. I mean, someone can give the right answer on a moral test, but that doesn't mean they'll actually do the right thing when the pressure is on in real life. And finally, and this one's a biggie, these theories describe what's happening, but they don't really explain it. They're descriptive, not explanatory. They paint a picture of the criminal mind, but don't tell us how it got that way.
Yeah, let's zero in on that last point for a second, because it's really important. This cognitive approach is fantastic at describing the what. It shows us the faulty thought patterns, it tells us the level of moral reasoning, but it leaves us hanging on the why. I mean, where do these cognitive distortions even come from? Why is someone's moral development delayed? Is it their childhood, their genes, something they learned? The cognitive explanation, for all its strengths, just doesn't give us the complete backstory. And this, naturally, leads us to a really crucial question about the research itself. I mean, how do we even know what we think we know? How do you peek inside someone's head and map out their moral world? The way we study these ideas is every bit as important as the ideas themselves. So let's go back to Kohlberg's original method for a moment. What did he actually do? Well, he'd sit down with someone, give them one of these complicated moral dilemmas, and then just listen. He'd listen to how they reasoned through it, and based on what they said, he'd place them into one of his stages of moral development. And right there, you can probably see a problem. I mean, how can you reliably, consistently categorize something as personal and messy as someone's moral reasoning? It's super subjective. You could have two different researchers listen to the exact same answer and come to two different conclusions. And that opens the door to all kinds of bias, and it makes you question just how scientific the findings really are. So, how could he have made it better? Well, one way to tackle this reliability problem would have been to use what's called a structured interview. It's a really simple but powerful idea. Basically, every single person gets asked the exact same questions in the exact same order. No exceptions. It creates a standard, taking the researcher's own interpretation out of the equation as much as possible. Now, using a structured interview has some obvious pluses. It makes the whole study easy to replicate. Another scientist could do the exact same thing and see if they get the same results. Super important. It also makes the data way easier to compare and analyze. But there's always a trade-off, isn't there? The big downside is that it's totally inflexible. You can't go off script and ask a follow-up question if someone says something really interesting. So, yeah, it might have made Kohlberg's work more reliable, but you have to wonder if he would have lost some of that rich, deep insight he got from just having a more natural conversation. And that leaves us with this final, kind of provocative question that really gets to the heart of all this. We can describe thought patterns, we can build these ladders of moral stages, but can we ever truly objectively measure something as personal, as complicated as a person's own morality? It's one of those questions that reminds us that even with all the incredible tools psychology gives us, the human mind is, and maybe always will be, the ultimate mystery.